All right, so in the last video, we went ahead and we set up this animation system where we can make our player walk left and so on. Let's make sure we select our player too. So here's our player. Let's see. And it looks like mine is missing, so I'm going to drag that back down there because we were fiddling around with it a little bit. Now you can see it starts at player left and down and then right and then walk. We do need an idle state, which we don't necessarily have. I think there's one in here. So if there isn't, we'll create one, which is just our character pretty much standing still. A lot of games you'll have your character squished, but let's take a quick look at this character sprite sheet, and I think we just have walks. Yeah, so anyway, what we can do is, if we look at walk down, if I drag this in here, you'll see nothing happens. So what we have to do is right click, and we're going to create a state, and it's empty, and I'm going to rename this state idle. This is going to be our default state. So if I right click here, set this as layer default state, but it's missing an animation. So I can go back to my animation tab, and with my player selected, I can create one more animation clip, and I'll just call this, let's make sure we put this in the right folder, art, PC, player, animations, and I'll call this player idle. All right, so there we go. We have our player idle. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And really, this is going to have a single image on it, and it's just going to be walk down this first frame. So when I press play, it's just this. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S on this to save it. And let's go and make this 4 frames, just so that it's 4 frames a second, just so we have something there that's similar to the others. Now in this idle here, you can see it automatically added that in there, so I guess I could delete this, but what you can do is you can grab your player idle animation that we created and you can drop it in there. It's just kind of showing you the different ways of doing things. Now, we're going to use something called the blend tree, and I'm not going to bore you with the definition, but there's alternate ways of setting this thing up so that we have transition. So for example, if I right click and I do make transition here, and I right click again and I set this as my layer default state, if I press play here, you can see that it goes between my player idle and my walk left. So I'll make a transition back. You can see it goes from there and it shoots back, and this is how it idles. And what you would do is you'd add things like these parameters. So I'm going to add like a Boolean just for now. I'm going to call this walk and then L just as an example. And you could select this, and you don't have to follow along in this. I just want to show you something. And if walk left is true, it'll go there. And if I select this branch and I hit plus here, and if walk left is false, because this is just a trick, a switch. Like if I check this on, it's true. If I check it off, it's false. So if I press play here, you can see this is set for false. So it's just constantly idling. And if I tick this on, you can see it goes down to walk left. And if I untick it, it goes back up to idle. I'm going to go ahead and delete these because I want to show you an alternate method of doing this. And I'm currently working on a platformer tutorial sort of at the same time as this. And so I'm going to use this old system for the platformer, just so you can, not the old system, but the alternate way of doing it in the platformer, just so you have that. But for now, I want to show you how to use something different called a blend tree. All right, so I'm just going to highlight these and I'm going to hit Control X. But it doesn't look like I cut it. All right, let's just delete them all together. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a state, but I'm going to create an empty one from a blend tree. And now you can see there's a blend tree here inside of our parameters. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this for a second. I'm going to go inside. Now what I deleted, if I go back, it was that parameter that we made as an example. But inside of here, I'm going to delete this parameter too. And we have an empty list here just because I want to show you something, how to create a clean blend tree between those walks. All right, so I'm going to hit plus here and I'm going to create a float. I'm going to call this move and then X, another float, move Y. Okay, why am I doing that? If I select my guy in our scene and I click on 2D here, remember this is all functioning on a vector 2. See how there's an X and a Y here? X is my moving left and right, and then my Y is moving up and down. So this is my vector 2. One vector would be, I'm going to move on one axis or one vector, that's the X-axis, and then this is going to be on the Y. So these two are going to trigger based on If I'm walking left or right, I want to play that animation if it's negative or positive. And then my up and down if this is moving up and down. And then we have our idle state, which we created, which is this player idle here. So we've got all these animations here. All right, so let's select our blend tree next. And you can see we have a blend tree of 1 dimension. We want to do a simple 2D simple directional. And you can see here we have what are the parameters we want to blend. Well, if I double click this, I can copy move X. Or I can click here and select move X and I can select move Y. Now a motion is, these are all motions. Idle, walk, left and right, up and down, right? So let's go ahead and just add a motion field. And I'm just going to add 4 motion fields. All right, so grab walk down here, and then you're going to put walk right here, and then walk up here, and then we want to do walk left here. Now the reason I know the values is because it says position X 0, 0, 0, 0, and this is for walk right. And then I'm looking at these numbers here, which we have to tweak. And this is the speed of our animation, by the way. So, all right, so if I select, for example, my character here, and I go down, notice that my value is going down. It's subtracting here. But I'm on my x-axis, I'm staying at 0. So what I want to do here is under walk down, I just want to make my position on y -1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed that into my S key. This will all make even more sense later. But if I'm going to move up, for example, you can see this is set to -1 here. And you'll see this start to update. And this works in correlation to this too. And I'll get into that in a second. So for now, let me kind of show you a little bit of how this works. If I move this move y down towards the negative value, I want you to watch what happens in this inspector. So I move this left, and this red dot gets closer, and this starts to amplify, meaning we're getting closer to playing this animation where our character is moving down. If we're back at 0 here, and this, look at this value is set to 0, and then this walk down is set to 1. So for example, if we set this to 0, the walk up, and we set this to 1, you can see now our walk up is here. And if I move this closer to 1, you can see switches from down, and this switches to up. The thing is, we are looking at walk. Here's walk up. We also have to kind of tweak some of these other values, but here's our walk up, and I think some of them are, let's see, do we have a value in walk up? Why is it sticking at walk right? Oh, you know, let's tweak the other values really quick, and then I'll show you, because it's looking at these, my walk right, which is set to 0, 0, and that really should be our idle state. All right, so for instance, like let's look at our character. If I move to the right, oops, not rotation. If I move our position of our character to the right, notice that that value goes up, but we want our y-axis to remain at 0. We could do a blend of them, where it moves off into the corner, but for now we're just focusing on those immediate thing. So that means this is 0, and then this is 1 here. So there's our walk right, and then our walk left here would be, oops, sorry, it should be 1 here on the x position, -1 here, and then 0 here. Because remember, if we're going to the left on our x-axis, it goes negative. So if we look at this, if I move, you can see now our character is all the way up here on 1. As we get towards the middle, it goes to 0. And if we stay at 0 here, this is roughly 0, 0. And that's why I was saying we kind of need an idle state. But it looks like it automatically defaults, so we might not use this player idle. But if I move X, notice our character looks to the left. If I move past the 0 point here to the negative, our character moves to the right. We don't see it updating the actual animation in here, but we do see it kind of switching between them. All right, so now that we have our blend tree, let's go ahead and open up our script. A couple other things just for housekeeping. I want to keep my, let's see, I want to keep my player script, I guess. Let's close this out. Really at the top. So I'm going to move up this guy, and I want to move my animator component just below just for readability, my player movement script. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video again and just put my player movement script here, and then to the left of that, the game, so you can see me work on this coding in real time. All right, so we have our animator here, and if we want to get access to this animator component, I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this line here and separate it out. I'm going to make this public. And the data type that we can type in here is just the word animator, which is the same name as our animator component. And then I'm making it public really just so you can see in Awake. I'm just going to get this component like I did with the rigid body, and you can see it just be populate inside the script. But I'm going to name this underscore animator. And let's make this lowercase here. And I'm going to save that. And I'm going to duplicate this get component here. And I'm going to grab this animator here, and then I'm going to say, hey, I want to get this animator component. Now, the reason why I'm doing it this way, I'm making it public instead of a serialized field, is I just want to show you as a refresher, because some of you might be jumping in this as the second class, and you might have forgotten this. So anyway, when you make something public, or if you make it private, but you add a serialized field here, and I'll show you that as well. You can see that the animator component is now visible. So let's do the alternative, which is make it private and make it a serialized field. Just as a reminder, you can see it still makes it exposed. Now, the reason I'm using this get component here is we have an animator here, and it's of type animator. And it's grabbing this component, which is this animator component that's attached to this object, and it's going to plug it in here for us. So that I'm going to go ahead and press play. You can see it plugged in on the player character, this animator component. Now it looks like it's playing by default that walk. And if we look in here, let's go back up. These are 0, 0. If we look up at this base layer here, it looks like at 0, 0, it's just playing that default animation. And let's make sure, yeah, here's our player animator component. We might actually have to set, let's see. We might have to create that idle state, because this is 0 and 0. Well, we'll adjust that too. We'll set the parameters inside of here so that our character doesn't start by default as walking. All right. So now that we have access to our animator here, I'm going to double click this and I'm going to grab this. And remember, what's contained within this animator is our player controller, and we have these two parameters. And remember, if our move x is set to -1 and 0, our character, let's see, will move to the left. And if it's set to this, to the right. And what we want to do though is we want this animation to be played when we press our WASD keys. And we have that actually in place here. Do you remember this move direction variable here? This is storing, or it's reading in the value of our our key presses, the WASD keys. It's all being stored inside this move direction, right? This is our move input. And down here, this is where we're adding force to our rigid body, and we're moving that position based on this move direction variable. So let's go ahead and just do a check. And so I'm going to do underscore animator dot set float. Now you might be like, well, why did you use set float? Do you remember we created these parameters here of type float? Well, if I highlight over this, I believe it tells us, yeah, it says set float, and it gives you some stuff, right? It says like, here, let's go inside of here. It wants us to, I know in Visual Studio it does a little bit better of a job of telling you, like, it wants you to add a name. Like here it's giving us this, oh, here we go, string. It's kind of doing the same thing. But the string that it's saying here is the name of this parameter. So what it's saying is, the name of the parameter I'm trying to set, which is move x, comma, by what value. And the value I want to use is, remember, we have this move direction here, which is being stored up top. And let's see. Oh, and actually, I don't want to put it in move player. I want to use it in this move input here. This is what's actually moving our player. Our movement input is what's taking in our input. So I want to grab move direction here, and I'm going to space this out just a little bit so we can see this. And I want to do .x. Now remember, this is taking in our player inputs.movement. Here, let me go ahead and bring that up really quick so you guys can see that again. Sorry if I'm being too redundant. You can just fast forward the video, but I like to over-explain things rather than under-explain it. Remember, this move direction here from the previous video, we created a variable called player inputs here, which takes into account this thing, which is our player inputs action that we created before here. And we have movement, move, and then we have this two-dimensional vector. And inside a move here, this is where we're reading in all of those vectors, the values rather, the x and the y. So what I'm saying here is we're going to grab this float x here, and based on me hitting A or D, that's our x-axis that's mapped here, we're going to set that float. So that's what's being called here. So it's checking, and it's going to add numbers or value to this move x parameter here, which is moving this, based on our WASD key. All right, so let's duplicate this, and let's just change this to y, and then we want to change this to uppercase Y so that it matches this parameter. You could double click this, hit copy, like Control C here, and then you could paste it in here. Oops, let's try that one more time. Control C, and then paste it in here if you want to make sure that this spelling is the same. So this is where you want to kind of like click in here and hit Control Shift C and check for any errors in your code, because really it's a lot of typing and just making sure it looks all the same. All right, let's test this. And really it's just going to keep looping to player walk down. But as I walk, notice our characters are moving like this. And then it defaults back up. Now, briefly, what we can do is inside of here, we can add one more parameter. Let's kind of scoot this over a little bit. And I'll add a motion field. And this time we'll grab player idle and drop it in there. And notice that it's set at 0, 0. So it's right at that point here. So now when I press play, we don't animate at all. And it always goes back to that idle. Now I don't have an idle animation. I didn't create one for this. But you can see here that we do have an idle. And hopefully this was clear. If you need any other further information or whatever on how to do this, let me know. I can make another tutorial. But I plan on doing one with Bones for the platformer tutorial. So look for that one if you're following along with that tutorial as well. But anyway, I think that's it for this one. I hope you enjoy it. And in the next video, I'm probably going to expand a little bit more on animations. If not, I'll start scripting out we'll start working on the health system.